nations. He's just using them. And so I find it encouraging to see an account of a man who actually knew God and recorded the events of God, speaking about God's attitude toward Nebuchadnezzar when he is lifted up with pride. And God did merely say, well, okay, so you've been used to judge my nations, you've been lifted up with pride, I didn't like you anyway, so zap, you're gone. God dealt with Nebuchadnezzar about his pride. Many individuals have a false understanding of the God of Israel. They say, salvation was never understood. The concept of the Messiah was never fully understood in the Old Testament. My friend, it certainly was understood, always has been, by both the Gentile nations and the nations of Israel, the nation of Israel. And so Nebuchadnezzar, God was concerned not just with his role in judging a people that God sovereignly chose. God was interested in Nebuchadnezzar as an individual. And when he was lifted up with pride, God loved him enough to humble him and cause him to be abased. And when he was lifted up with pride again, God loved him enough to deal with him on that level. God was merciful, wasn't he? In the book of Daniel, right at the beginning, when we see this individual that is set over the eunuchs, and he's the prince of the eunuchs, and he's in a dangerous spot. He would endanger his head to the king if Daniel and his friends didn't comply with the dietary laws. And yet, God was concerned about that matter. And he took care of it. And it caused it so that a decree was made that this is the way things are going to be. And God was pleased, I would go so far to say, when Nebuchadnezzar would issue decrees, such as, you can't bow to any God other than the God of Israel. There's no God other than the God of Israel. We're going to see that again this evening for one last time. I want to remind you, as we're in a portion of the book of Daniel, which is that so far in the book of Daniel, we've seen largely God's dealing with Gentile nations. We saw it with the Babylonian Empire. Now we're seeing it with the Medo-Persian Empire. And God did judge harshly the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar when he was lifted up with pride against the God of the Bible. Now we find an individual that has some wisdom about him. Matter of fact, verse 1 says about Darius, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. Now, Daniel has just been recognized by Belteshazzar for the abilities that he possesses. Nebuchadnezzar put Daniel in charge of everything. And he recognized that Daniel's ability to rule, his ability to manage, was second to none, and he was trustworthy. He was a loyal servant, and he had great wisdom. Now, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar hadn't recognized those things until the queen, which would probably have been his mother, comes to the place where she points out to him that there used to be a man that helped Nebuchadnezzar a great deal, and he was unsurpassed in wisdom and in his ability to know the things pertaining to the gods. Of course, she would have had a heathen perspective about Daniel as well. And so this individual, Belshazzar, comes to the place when he recognizes who Daniel was, but that's the same night that he is deposed, and so it really doesn't matter with regard to Daniel's position. He can be, it doesn't mean a lot, does it, for somebody who's getting ready to be taken out to promote you? And so Daniel is, he has a king who's not wise enough to recognize his ability. But here he is in a nation which is conquered by a brilliant military strategist led by this Darius the king. And Darius comes in, immediately recognizes Daniel's ability and puts him over these 120 rulers. And it's obvious to them that it's obvious from our text that they resent Daniel and the fact that he's wiser than them, and they don't feel as though he's deserving. Now, can you empathize with them just a little bit? I mean, he's from the conquered nation. How often do you go in and take over, well, just think about this from a business sense, if you will. Think of it as from a large corporation perspective. You go and you take over Ford Motor Company and you get out the Fords and you take their president and you leave him president. What usually happens when a large company is overtaken, and by overtaken I mean restructured. It's a mess. It's been taken over. What usually happens? Well, they replace everybody in management. The first thing you do if a business fails is you replace everybody in management. And here is a great empire that has fallen, and they come in to replace everyone in management except for the top dog. Usually if you're going to keep one or two people, you're going to demote them, put them down here, and then you're going to put somebody that is a part of the takeover in the top position. Well, Daniel's obviously recognized, and probably by no, this is speculation, but it would be understood, I believe, from the text, that they would have known that Daniel would have prophesied the judgment of Belshazzar. And so they would have known that Daniel's a very neutral individual here. He serves the Most High God. And you can't find a better person to put in charge of something than someone who doesn't have a conflict of interest. Daniel certainly was not looking for an earthly Gentile kingdom. If he was concerned about a kingdom on earth, it would have been Jewish. But so he wasn't concerned about becoming something in a Gentile nation, so we have that for consideration. As well as Daniel, I don't believe, would have been in consideration for a Jewish kingdom, because he served the Most High God. And so there was really no conflict of interest in putting him in this high spot. It would have been difficult to bribe a man like Daniel. It would have been difficult to get him to do wrong. Matter of fact, it's understood from the text that it was impossible to do so, because these men would certainly have used those tactics to try to undermine him and overthrow him. They're not able to do so, and they said the only thing we know about Daniel, and they're pretty intelligent to hit on this. One thing we know about Daniel is that there's only one thing about him that we know for sure, and that's that he's going to honor God. Now, they could know a lot of things else for sure, but the one thing they knew for sure was that what mattered to him was his God. And that no authority in the world could cause him to compromise what he believed about his God. And they said, well, this is where we'll get him. By the way, this is a tactic of Satan. You know, Satan used this same kind of a tactic against Job. God said about his servant Job, he says, there's nobody like him in the earth. He does good and he hates evil. And so, what is it that Job was attacked for? Well, he was trying to set up so that he would curse God. Satan said if things just go wrong for him, he'll curse God. And Job withstood the test, didn't he? He didn't curse God, he didn't turn against his God. And so these men knew this, and probably they knew the story of Job, and they thought, well, if a guy is that loyal, if he is that godly, and he's that faithful a servant of God, the only thing we can do is make it illegal for him to do what he does. And so that's what they tried. They went to Darius. And by the way, is there a recurring theme of sin in the book of Daniel? Is there a recurring sin?
Yes.
What is it? Pride. In every case, the recurring sin, the thing that causes those individuals that have been greatly blessed by God, is sin. Now, I've been astounded as I've studied the book of Daniel. I'm constantly amazed at God's hand in the Gentile nations. He's not just passively interested in them, or, well, you know, Israel's on the side right now, and so we'll just let you do what you're on the scene, and you can do whatever you like to, but you're just there as a temporary until we replace you. No, God was very involved in the Gentile nations, and one of the things that God did not allow was the sin of pride. And here's Darius, who seems to have, would we agree, just based upon his military strength and his ability. Do you know how Darius overthrew Babylon? Do you know how they did it? Yes, ma'am.
They diverted the water and then went through underneath the city.
Yeah, they went under the water gates. They broke through the water gates. So here you have a major river flowing through Babylon. This is an impregnable city. It has walls that are so great that were the walls of Babylon. They were one of the seven wonders, weren't they? They were incredibly thick, incredibly tall.
The hanging gardens were.
The hanging gardens were, but I think the walls of Babylon were. You sure they weren't? All right, tell me what the other seven were. You think about those and write them down.
Process of roads.
He knows too. Look at him. Well, that would be in the Roman Empire, wouldn't it?
You asked me what the other seven.
Okay, all right. I got to brush up on those, so you help me with that after the service. But I do know this, that the walls of Babylon were impregnable. Belshazzar is surrounded. He's under siege, and he's feasting. He's not at all concerned about Darius' ability to conquer him. And here is Darius, who is an upstart, definitely starting up, but he's an upstart young man, young king, and a conqueror. And in combination with the Medo-Persian empires have combined, and they're going to take out the biggest empire in the world. Belshazzar is not at all concerned, and they divert the waters that go through the city, stop them from flowing. They come up with this brilliant, you'd have to just have an understanding of geology, you'd have to have an understanding of this fellow Darius